Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're focusing on a conflict that, on the surface, really just looks like celebrity gossip.
Yeah, it seems that way at first glance.
But when you actually dig into the sources, it's this perfect flashpoint. It captures this huge shift in how we all see things like virtue signaling, class, and, what happens when massive privilege crashes right into real lived hardship.
That's absolutely it. We're dissecting the very high-profile and, frankly, extremely bitter public fight between Emma Watson and J.K. Rowling.
Right.
And when you pull the source material apart, it's so much more than just a spat between an actress and the author who, basically created her entire career. The analysis frames it as a critical tipping point.
A tipping point in what way?
In the broader culture war, the one that's affected everything from how we consume media to our political views and even how we think about our own identity.
Okay, so let's unpack that with the immediate spark. The final thing that really brought this whole feud to a head happened pretty...
Watson was on a podcast, and she offered up what sounded like this very polished, but ultimately kind of hollow statement.
A bit of moral superiority, maybe?
That's how the sources frame it. She said it was her deepest wit that she could keep loving people she disagrees with, designed to sound noble and loving.
Sure, very magnanimous.
But one source calls it pure, unadulterated Hollywood moral ground stand. It was all about signaling where she stood without ever having to engage with the actual difficult substance of the disagreement.
And Rowling's response to this, it wasn't flowery at all, was it?
Oh, not at all. It was the complete opposite.
Yeah.
It was precise, it was pointed, and it was absolutely cutting. A public takedown on Twitter.
And she called Watson, what, ignorant of how ignorant she is?
Exactly that. And critically, she didn't just stop at the disagreement. She immediately brought class and money right into the center of the conversation.
That's the key part, isn't it?
It is. She said flat out, I wasn't a multimillionaire at 14. I lived in poverty while writing the book that made Emma famous. And that contrast, that laid out path of wealth versus the grinding struggle of a single mom, that's the engine of this whole thing, is what we need to extract today.
Okay. So our mission for you, the listener, is to really follow that contrast. We are comparing two very similar cultural paths.
Right. Two women, global icons from the same franchise. They both started out on the same side of, mainstream liberal feminism.
But they ended up in radically different places, and it all seems to come down to their relationship with authenticity and privilege.
Yeah. We want to understand what happens when a celebrity chooses, genuine conviction over what the establishment is saying, versus when they just stay inside that celebrity bubble, pushing these narratives that, according to the sources, really only benefited a tiny, guarded elite.
To really get a handle on the huge ideological split that came later, we have to go right back to the beginning. We need to look at the foundations of their fame.
And with Emma Watson, the source material paints this picture of what they call the laid-out path.
That term feels really important.
It's crucial because it speaks to this structural inherited advantage.
Yeah.
Watson was born into what the analysis just calls extreme wealth. Her parents were successful lawyers in Paris.
So even before Harry Potter was even a thought, she was already set up.
Completely. Her dad was already buying vineyards in France.
Yeah.
Securing her place in that European elite. It was a whole different world.
It's the definition of institutional advantage, not just having money. She was raised in Oxford. She went to the Dragon School, which is this really prestigious prep school.
And we have to talk about the cost of that.
Yeah.
The fees today, the sources note, are just staggering.
Something like $30,000 to $50,000 a year.
And that's just the start. It's closer to $70,000 a year when you add in all the extras. It's a huge financial barrier.
So that $70,000 a year wasn't just buying an education.
No, it was buying a network,
Yeah.
an environment, access. The connection to the Harry Potter franchise feels almost like predetermined because her education just lined up so perfectly with what the studio needed.
Tell us a bit more about that, the institutional advantage in the actual casting.
Well, when the casting call for the films went out, they didn't do, open auditions in every state school in the UK.
Of course not.
They naturally went to specific institutions. In her private school, it already looked like something out of Hogwarts. The environment didn't just teach her acting. It physically put her in the path of the opportunity.
So she sort of sidestepped the whole brutal audition process that most actors go through.
Completely. She was one of a lucky few who got selected to move forward. And what's really fascinating is that even at that early stage, she was only 10 a year. J.K. Rowling herself was a huge part of it.
Really? How so?
The analysis points out that during the very first screen test, Rowling personally picked Emma out. She was vocal about her being the perfect Hermione Granger.
Wow. So she was literally the architect of Watson's entire future.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that detail is so crucial because it makes the eventual public denunciation, the throwing Rowling under the bus.
Yeah.
It makes it feel so much colder, so strategic on Watson's part.
Rowling gives her fame, and Watson repays her by siding with the liberal elite when the cultural wind shifted.
That's the narrative. Now, let's shift to the environment that shaped Watson right after she got the part, the child star bubble.
Right. This is where you really see the cost of that instant, massive fame. She was 10 years old and spent a whole decade inside this controlled, wealthy Harry Potter world.
And the analysis suggests this led to a pretty profound, an erosion of her identity.
You mean she spent her whole adolescence in this kind of golden cage?
Exactly. She was living this fantasy life, seeing her face on billboards everywhere, but the core analysis is that she never, ever had the grounding of a normal life.
She never faced any real gritty hardship.
Never. The sources are clear. She never knew what it was like to struggle for rent or navigate friendships without the shield of being a celebrity, or even do her own laundry.
The mundane stuff.
All of it. She was set apart from her peers from the age of 10. She never had to develop those basic coping skills that you get from just living a normal adult life.
It's that classic double-edged sword of celebrity, isn't it? She's adored, she's financially secure forever, she could just coast.
But at the same time, she's under this intense microscope, which means she can never really figure out who she is outside of being Hermione.
And a lot of child stars go through this.
It's a very common experience. You see it with people like Demi Lovato, who called early fame traumatic and specifically mentioned the absence of childhood.
And Watson herself, she eventually...
She did. By 2012, she had this really public moment of realization. She's quoted as saying, "I have had no control over my life. I have lived in a complete bubble, and now I'm desperately trying to find my way through it."
That admission is really the key to understanding why she later pivoted to acting.
I think so. If your life is a bubble and you've always had a script, how do you build a real identity without ever going through a real struggle? She was in this impossible position of being the most famous person in the room, but also having no idea who she was supposed to.
Which brings us to the sharpest contrast in the whole story, J.K. Rowling. Her life experience was much closer to Harry Potter's than to Emma.
Oh, absolutely. Rowling's childhood was incredibly normal for the time, which is to say, no financial cushion at all. She suffered from mental health issues, and then her mother got sick with MS at a young age.
And MS is a devastating, unpredictable...
Right. The financial, the emotional, the physical toll of dealing with a chronic illness in the family, it gives you a profound education in real world.
And what's really illuminating when we talk about structural advantage is their education paths.
A world of difference.
Sure.
Rowling was incredibly smart, but she was rejected from key universities when she applied. The analysis points out this was likely due to the disadvantage of her state school background.
So even with the grade, the system was kind of stacked.
She had to fight for every single academic gain. She experienced real economic hardship after her mother died, and then she became a single mother on benefits. She literally wrote the first Harry Potter book while in poverty.
In a cafe, right, because she couldn't afford to heat her own flat.
Exactly. Now contrast that, fighting institutional barriers and actual poverty, with Watson. For her, because of her privilege, the elite academic path was just always open.
She goes from her expensive private school to Brown in the U.S., then to Oxford.
That ability to just bounce between the world's most prestigious universities, it shows a level of ease that Rowling never had early on. Rowling had to struggle to prove her worth to institutions. Watson was just ushered in, and that difference is the foundation for everything that comes later.
So after the Harry Potter films ended, Emma Watson has all the fame and money in the world, but she's also very aware she lacks a real identity.
Right, and the sources say her first strategy was to try two main paths: serious academia and competitive Hollywood.
And both of them didn't really work out for her.
Not in the way she'd hoped. Her retreat into academia, spending time at Brown and Oxford, was supposed to be this grounding experience.
Return to normal life.
But the analysis suggests it just created a different kind of bubble. Instead of connecting her to reality, these elite universities can be echo chambers for very specialized academic theories, diversity quotas, that kind of thing.
So she just traded the Hollywood bubble for the academic one.
Pretty much. She didn't get a reality check. She just got a new intellectual-sounding script she could use in public, adding that Hollywood shine to academic talks.
And then came the attempt to make it in Hollywood on her own terms, away from Harry Potter.
And the source describes this as bone-breakingly painful. She walked onto these new film sets with the expectation she'd built up over a decade on Potter.
That everyone would be like a family.
Exactly, lifelong friend. And that expectation was just shattered.
Why was it so different?
The reality of competitive Hollywood is that it's brutal and it's transactional. These were actors who hadn't been handed a dream role at 10. They were fighting to prove themselves. Watson was suddenly struggling just to prove she belonged there as a serious actress, not just as Hermione.
And this all led to some pretty deep personal insecurity.
It did. The analysis points out that by age 25, she felt so inadequate because she just didn't have answers yet. She even admitted to envying her friends who had a clear sense of self, saying, "I was so unsure of."
That crisis of self really created a vacuum, didn't it?
It did.
Yeah.
And that feeling of inadequacy, plus the fact that her acting roles weren't getting great reviews, critics called her blank in the circle, it all led to a very predictable pivot.
The move to celebrity act.
That's it. Activism became her path to relevance. If she couldn't consistently compete as a top-tier actress, activism gave her a way to stay in the public eye, reassert her own identity, and crucially, fit right into the Hollywood groupthink.
And we should be fair here. Her initial activist work was actually good.
Oh yeah, the analysis calls it great stuff. In 2012, she became an ambassador for CamFed International, an organization focused on female education in developing African countries.
So she was using her platform to raise money and awareness for people in real poverty.
Tangible, measurable impact. But then the scale shift. She moved on to grander, less tangible gestures.
Like becoming a UN Women Goodwill Ambassador and launching He for She campaign.
And this is where the critique in the source material gets really sharp. The analysis argues that her UN speech was, well, largely trite and performative.
How so?
Well, the speech was mostly about calling on normal men around the world to fight for women's rights. The critique is that this just deflects responsibility.
It puts the burden on regular people instead of the people with actual power.
Exactly. Rather than appealing to governments or massive corporations who can actually make systemic changes, she's asking people with the least power to solve problems created by those.
And this deflection kind of sets the stage for the big contradiction. And
it's a perfect example of her just parroting whatever was trending in her elite circle instead of forming her own opinions.
Okay, so what's the direct contradiction?
In 2014, the same year as that UN speech, she criticized a Beyoncé music video, saying it felt very male voyeurist. She was positioning herself as this intellectual critic of, sexualized marketing and entertainment.
But then, just a few years later,
just 3 years later, in 2017, those words came back to haunt her. She appeared on the cover of Vanity Fair in an incredibly revealing top.
So she was doing the exact same thing she had criticized Beyoncé for.
Exactly the same thing. It was a complete capitulation to the very systems she claimed to be against, all for a magazine cover.
The sources are pretty clear. This was a visible, undeniable hypocrisy. It really signaled that she was just following what everyone else was saying, rather than sticking to any kind of her own. She was just conforming.
And that behavior pattern becomes absolutely central to her actions during the culture war.
So as the culture war really started to heat up in the late 2010s, it's so important to remember that J.K. Rowling was at first on the same side as Emma Watson.
Oh, completely. For years, she was the darling of the very same liberal elite.
The sources back this up. She was donating to the UK Labour Party. She supported refugee rights back in 2015.
She was consistently called a filthy liberal by right-wing commentators. Her whole public stance was fundamentally progressive.
So the shift didn't come from her changing her core beliefs.
No, it came from the experience of an intense, sudden, and just wildly disproportionate backlash from her own side.
And the sources point to one specific moment as the catalyst?
They do. She accidentally liked a single tweet in 2018.
Just one mistaken click, that was it.
That was enough. And even though she apologized immediately, said it was an accident, that one tiny action was enough to kick off this immediate campaign of threats, abuse, and harassment.
A campaign that's still going on today.
It is. And that intensity of backlash is the real turning point in her story. When she saw how fast and how viciously her own allies turned on her for a simple mistake, it completely changed how she saw the liberal elite.
So over the next couple of years, that experience pushed her to be more skeptical of the new rigid narratives being pushed by the mainstream.
She became much more set in her own personal conviction, moving away from the elitism that had previously embraced her.
And her evolving view on women's rights and sex-based protections, that became the huge
It did. But the analysis makes a very specific point. Her views aren't actually that extreme when you compare them to the general population, especially in the UK.
Okay, so what were her views exactly?
She wrote this long 5,000-word essay explaining that her position was basically about ensuring that the rights of one marginalized group, trans people, didn't accidentally infringe on the existing sex-based rights and safety of another group, biological women.
Specifically regarding things like women-only space.
Right, like changing rooms or prison. The sources say this position, balancing competing rights, is actually pretty similar to what the average person over 50 in the UK think. But she was totally demonized for it.
And what's key here, when you compare her to Watson, is the authenticity. Rowling's beliefs weren't from academic talking points.
Not at all. They were forged by her life experience, her mental health struggles, her poverty, her understanding of being a vulnerable woman. When her accepted liberal views clashed with the new corporate-backed liberal narrative, she stuck to her convictions and faced the music.
That's the definition of choosing authenticity over career safety within that system.
It really is. Now contrast that with Emma Watson's 2020 tweet, which was partly a response to Rowling. The sources call her response a nice sentiment, but also profoundly superficial.
It was a beautiful sounding tweet, but it completely dodged the actual issues Rowling was raising about women.
It totally sidestepped the core con. It was designed to offer moral support to the side that Hollywood favored at that moment, without offering any real intellectual engagement.
The analysis calls this a textbook move for social proof.
That's the perfect phrase for it. It was a way for Watson to impress the liberal elite, signal her support for the popular cause, and protect her own brand without actually risking it.
Even if it meant denouncing the person who made her entire career possible.
It was a necessary career move for her at that time. It was the ultimate display of choosing alignment over loyalty or substance.
And this behavior really highlights what the sources see as the ultimate failure of celebrity virtue. The culture war started to lose public support in the late 10s because people realized that while the rich and powerful were getting richer, they were also blaming regular people for the world's problems.
This public fatigue really came to a head in what the sources call the Golden Globe.
Ricky Gervais's monologue at the 2019 Golden
It was iconic. He perfectly channeled and summed up everyone's growing frustration with elite celebrities lecturing them. He was relentless.
He didn't hold back at all, did he?
Not a bit. He told them, don't use it as a platform to make a political. You're in no position to lecture the public about anything. You know nothing about the real world.
I remember he specifically called them out for working with companies like Apple and Amazon while publicly criticizing them.
He did. He even joked that most of them had spent less time in school than Greta Thunberg. It was a watershed moment. It signaled that the public was just done with political sermons for people who fly on private jets.
And the consequence was immediate. You could really see it.
You could. Award shows got way less political overnight. Those celebrity activist videos, like the Imagine one, were just instantly mocked. Reputations were damaged.
And Hollywood movies that were seen as pushing an agenda started bombing at the box office.
Because the consumer consensus was actively shifting. People were tired of it. They realized that the celebrity activism, whether it was in a UN speech or a viral video, just didn't have any real conviction behind it. It was just self-serving.
So if the tide was turning against this celebrity-driven culture war, what were the actual professional consequences for women?
Well, for Watson, her acting career was already stalling out. Critics often pointed to her limited range. Some even joked it was all in her eyebrow. She just couldn't consistently carry a major film outside of the Potter franchise.
And her public image took some big hits outside of acting, too.
The biggest, most damning one was her being implicated in the Panama Papers.
Right. This was that huge leak exposing how global hide their wealth in offshore accounts to avoid tax.
Exactly. And the contradiction is just. It's profound. Watson had positioned herself as a champion against global poverty, lecturing everyone from her UN platform.
And yet her name shows up in the document.
She's named as one of the highest profile people using this system to shelter massive personal wealth through a trust called Falling Leaves Ltd. The analysis says this just completely neutralized any moral authority she had on economic issues.
So the sources argue that this, plus her stalling acting career, basically left her with only one viable job.
And that job was making companies look good. She became a mouthpiece for corporate ideology.
So she gets a big salary and stays in the public eye. And in return, corporations get to borrow her supposedly virtuous image to, whitewash their brand.
That's the argument. She became the literal face of the corporate hypocrisy that the public was starting to reject.
And you see it in her work today, right? That Vogue video where she's making cocktails.
Which was conveniently timed to coincide with the launch of her own gin brand, an offshoot of her father's wine business. It's all about calculated, risk-free publicity.
It keeps her relevant without her ever having to take a genuine stand on it.
And the sources conclude that, in a way, she was canceled by her lack of real opinions and beliefs. She went all in on the corporate message just as the public was moving on.
Now, J.K. Rowling, on the other hand, chose conviction and authenticity. She deviated from the party line and paid a huge price for it.
An immense personal and social cost. She was immediately labeled a TERF and a preacher of hate. The analysis confirms she started getting very real death threats, rape threats, torture threats. She had to seriously upgrade her personal security.
And she was publicly denounced by basically everyone connected to Harry Potter. The actors, the producers.
She was effectively sidelined from the franchise she created. The cultural mainstream just banished her for her views.
But, and this is the most important insight here, this is where the culture war narrative completely breaks down against market reality.
Right. Despite all the intense online backlash, the calls for boycotts, the negative reviews from journalists who refused to even play the game.
The Harry Potter-based game, Hogwarts Legacy, was released.
And the market response was just staggering. The game pulled in over $1 billion in revenue within weeks.
$1 billion.
Yeah. It showed this profound disconnect. The public, the actual broad consumer base, they often just didn't really care anymore about the manufactured outrage coming from the liberal elite echo chamber.
That's a huge piece of evidence. It supports the whole argument that the woke era of corporate influence was ended.
It showed that online campaigns, even against someone as famous as Rowling, could be made completely irrelevant if people just wanted the product and were willing to vote with their wallets.
People were choosing nostalgia and entertainment over political purity.
Exactly. The outrage mob, it's loud, but it doesn't actually represent the consumer consensus in a way that really matters financially.
Now, connecting this to the bigger picture of fame and the modern attention economy,
Yeah.
the source material has this interesting kind of self-contained.
Right. The reality is that managing a massive personal brand, whether you're Emma Watson or J.K. Rowling, is now completely tied to technology.
And the sources mention a specific tool, Opus, calling it a full-blown AI video growth engine.
Yeah, if you've ever wondered how these incredibly busy, high-profile creators, people like Jubilee, Mark Rober, Scott Galloway, manage to pump out a constant stream of content on every platform, this is apparently a big part of how they do it.
It's all about radical automation to keep up.
The platform can just auto-import a long YouTube video, chop it up into viral short clips, and even schedule them to post everywhere. And the analysis says creators using it have seen massive jumps in watch time, views, and subscriber.
And it's gotten really sophisticated, too. They mention an AI editor with 50 caption styles and something called Reframe Anything 2.0.
Which they describe as working like Tesla autopilot for tracking people in the footage, making sure every clip is perfectly framed.
So regardless of whether you're navigating a culture war or building a corporate brand, your relevance now depends on leveraging these powerful AI tools to just feed them.
And the machine of content never stopped, and neither can the celebrities need to feed it.
The final decisive moments of this whole feud were really defined by two key actions that just perfectly captured the different priorities of.
One was a very public act of posturing, and the other was a very strange private communication.
The public moment was Watson at the 2022 BAFTA. This is where she gave that famous, very loaded speech.
Right, where she declared, "I'm here for all the witch." And the sources do say that how people interpret this is debated. Was it a direct shot at Rowling or just a pre-approved line?
But regardless of the public interpretation, the crucial thing was what happened privately, which Rowling later exposed.
Watson asked a third party, not Rowling herself, to pass on a handwritten note.
A handwritten note? I mean, think about how weirdly old-fashioned that is, especially for two global figures who were friends for over a decade.
And the content was just as stark. It was a single, very passive sentence. "I'm so sorry for what you're going through."
And Rowling's reaction to that, which she later made public, was just so cutting.
"She has my number."
Wow. That detail is devastating, isn't it? It just speaks to a total lack of courage.
It does. And this note was sent when the threats against Rowling, the death, rape, and torture threats, were at their absolute peak. She was tightening her personal security.
So Watson was publicly aligning herself against Rowling, embracing the Hollywood narrative that condemned her.
But privately, she was trying to soothe her own conscience, or maybe, stay in her good books through a third party. It was a low-risk, minimal-effort gesture of sympathy.
It was the ultimate display of risk management. She wanted the social proof of denouncing Rowling to protect her career while trying to maintain some kind of private morality.
She chose the path of least resistance in both directions.
So for years after that note, Rowling just stayed silent about it, enduring all the public backlash by herself.
She did. And what finally triggered her famous cutting tweet, the one that started this whole discussion, was Watson's recent podcast appearance.
The one where she not only highlighted their disagreement, but also claimed she still loved and cherished Rowling.
The source frames this as the moment of peak Hollywood moral ground stand, the ability to publicly condemn someone's views while also claiming the high ground of loving them unconditionally.
It was that final attempt to posture, to express disapproval and claim moral superiority that just broke Rowling's.
And that's when she sent the final tweet, cut right through all the sentimentality and the hypocrisy.
She contrasted Watson's multimillionaire status at 14 with her own grinding poverty while creating Watson's fame.
It was a refusal to play that polite, self-serving game of agreeing to disagree. It reframed the whole thing not as an ideological squabble, but as a deep class disparity that was fueling superficial activism.
And it serves as a perfect final chapter, doesn't it? One woman, Emma Watson, who remains remarkably stable and did some good charity work.
But her overall impact was just hollowed out by her commitment to the corporate Hollywood propaganda.
And the other woman, J.K. Rowling, who chose authenticity over the mainstream narrative, she paid a huge personal cost.
But the market, as shown by the massive success of Hogwarts Legacy, ultimately proved that her beliefs, whatever you think of them, were rooted in a reality that just transcended that performative online outrage bubble.
So what does this whole saga really mean for you? This deep dive gives us a clear roadmap of the consequences of celebrity virtue signaling.
And the need to distinguish between a curated performance and genuine conviction.
Right. For the learner, the key takeaway is pretty simple. When you're looking at these cultural conflicts, you have to learn to see the difference between the self-serving narrative of the wealthy celebrity bubble
And the sometimes painful, often resilient reality of authenticity that's been forged by actual hardship.
It really confirms the central argument from our source, that shift away from the woke era and the continuing importance of
Celebrities need to step away from lecturing the public about real-world problems they know nothing about, because the public is just so tired of being told how to live by people who inhabit a completely different, sheltered reality.
The public isn't fooled anymore when the rich and powerful blame regular people for not fixing the world's problems.
While they're simultaneously hiding their own wealth offshore. It's that simple.
Exactly. And when you analyze that whole arc, that passive handwritten note sent during peak death threats versus the public posture of loving disagreement, it just reveals a profound lack of courage.
A lack of the courage needed to genuinely stand by a conviction, even against a former friend. The celebrity brand just became more important than loyalty or shared history.
So here's where it gets really interesting, and this is a final provocative thought consider. Given the monumental market success of Hogwarts Legacy, a success that completely defied one of the most intense cancellation efforts we've ever.
And the overall shift away from political award speeches and virtue signals.
How should we, as consumers and citizens, interpret the difference between online outrage and actual public market sense?
Because the ability of a digital mob to cancel someone socially is obviously potent. We see it every day. But the market test, the ability of that mob to actually influence what people buy, seems to be getting weaker and weaker.
That tension between the perceived consensus of the online elite and the actual consensus of the broad buying public.
That's the critical indicator you should be tracking as the culture war evolves, is what will determine who holds the real cultural power going forward.
That is a deep dive completed. Thank you for joining us.